So today I'm pretty excited. I'm going to be playing Jeskai Control. Jeskai is a variant of Control that we haven't seen in a little while. We've been seeing blue-white Control for ages, so we know about Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, and how powerful this card can be as a card advantage engine / removal / just way to actually win the game as a win condition. The fact that it can tuck itself in, so we know that we can build around this card. And red provides a number of options that are pretty appealing in this new standard format here with Guilds of Ravnica. The mana base is surprisingly pretty decent for being a 3-color deck. We've got a lot of different 2-color lands to choose from, the Sacred Foundries and the Steam Vents being two of the more important ones in the newest editions. Search for a Scanna, great with Teferi, another type of card advantage, card filtering, way to take over the game. The deck also has a few different counterspells, Essence Scatter, Negate. Ionize it makes your opponent take some chip damage. And so sometimes you can finish your opponent off with maybe they take a little bit from the Ionize, and then you can just use the explosions later in the game as fireballs. So they are not just cancels, they are a little bit better than that. And then Syncopate is one that we've seen before. The exile part of Syncopate can be quite important. As far as removal, Lightning Strike and Justice Strike, 2 mana, kill something is quite important. And then some Deafening Clarions. Deafening Clarion is the cheapest sweeper that the deck has access to, and at 3 mana, if your opponent has a quick start, comes out of the gates with creature, and then you have a Deafening Clarion, that can be a huge game-breaking play. Settle, also a nice sweeper type effect. One of my favorite cards for these control decks from Guilds of Ravnica is Chemist's Insight. Being able to draw 2 and then draw 2 again, maybe pitching a land that you have too many of, is really good. There's another one in the board as well to go up to 4 copies. Ixalan's Binding, just all-purpose removal. And then, yeah, these expansion explosions, you can copy any of these spells, but the fact that later in the game, this is a way to draw a bunch of cards and get rid of a threat all rolled into one is why the card is so good here. There's some additional counter magic in the board, some Lyras to close games out, Nezahal as a nice control finisher in those matchups, and then some additional sweepers. So it's just kind of a well-rounded Jeskai deck. You've got a number of card advantage spells and a number of removal spells and some counter spells. So for those players that like playing a more controlling version of this color combination, this is kind of a deck that I'm looking towards. I think it's got a good matchup against a lot of the mid-range decks. We've seen Golgari doing well, and basically any deck that is pretty slow, this deck is going to be able to feast on those decks because it's just going to have enough time to draw as many cards as it wants, and then eventually later in the game it's going to take over. So make sure to tune in and watch these videos as they unfold. Alright, we're going to get to lead things off, and with the mulligan, yay! Perfect way to start off. Can't complain about our 6, though. Our 6 is pretty good. I think we're good on lands for now with 4. So we can scribe that to the bottom. Dauntless Bodyguard, eh? Well, I think we're probably just going to get rid of that, although we did draw a Search for a Scanta, which we can play. Yeah, I guess we play that this turn. set up our draws a little bit. Hunted Witness. Ooh, wow, that's a spicy one. Wasn't expecting to see that. Not going to be great here, but especially with our opponent missing a land. A second land. So our opponent's probably on like a mono white, maybe not mono white, but some sort of white beatdown deck. I think we just keep this Ixalan's Binding. And just start like getting rid of these threats. Land our Teferi and kind of go to town with Teferi. That's the plan. Alright, so there's the land that our opponent was looking for. And a Adanto Vanguard, that's generally a good card against control. Although, unfortunately for our opponent, Ixalan's Binding does answer it. Okay, those were two cards on top of our deck we didn't really want in second search, which we, of course, put in the graveyard, but then also second Teferi. So now we're actually looking for another land. But if we don't find one, it's probably not, like, immediately, it's probably not the end of the world. Knight of Grace, so just a variety of white dudes. What our opponent's bringing to the table. I do think we want that fifth land. We can just put Teferi onto the battlefield, tick it up, and then our opponent likely cannot get rid of it. And we know how that can go. It's if the opponent doesn't immediately get rid of the Teferi, and it stays in play for a few turns. But that being said, I mean, we don't have much of anything going on with our hand, so game's definitely not over. Our opponent's got 5 or 6 spells in hand. Dauntless Bodyguard. So that's going to protect the Knight of Grace and then a Conclave Tribunal. That actually may not be bad news because we do have another Teferi. Well, it's definitely an interesting spot. The Tribunal's pretty good because we can't safely tick Teferi up as of right now without Teferi dying because our opponent has 3 creatures in play. So we're really looking for a way to kind of wipe the board clean. Something like a Deafening Clarion or a Settle the Wreckage. Ionize is okay. I think we just put it in the graveyard. Not exactly what we want. And I am going to play out this Teferi and just draw a card with it. I mean, there's something to be said for minusing, but yeah. We're trying to protect our life total, draw into a sweeper, and then also put cards in the graveyard to be able to flip our search. So those are the kinds of things we're thinking about. I'll play this Glacial Fortress so we can syncopate for 2 if that does come up. Our opponents could just have something like a History of Benalia to play. And nothing we can do about this attack. Remorseful Cleric. I think we counter that because it can stop us from flipping our search. And now we're up to 5 cards, so in the graveyard, we do want to find a nice spell here to cast for our turn, because otherwise we're just taking 5. Justice Strike is, I think, worth keeping. It's not the perfect spell, not the perfect card, but we do keep it. Do believe we're supposed to keep it. And just use it on one of these 2-power threats. That's the 6th card in the graveyard. So now we can flip the search if we want to put our card in the graveyard, but we're worried about what our opponent can play now. Because if it is like a History of Benalia or like another threat, Conclave Tribunal, oh, wow, that's good. That takes away our search. We drew Deafening Clarion for turn. I think we just hold it. I think we want to hold it to wait and hope our opponent plays another creature. Because the Hunted Witness comes back. And so, yeah, our opponent's committing. Oh, it's all Venerated Luxodon. Okay, well, we can get rid of 3 of our opponent's dudes. But the Hunted Witness does return. But, well, we have to. So, we deal 3 to everything. Should we play the Field of Ruin? Yeah, I guess we should. But it doesn't feel good. We're taking 5 here, and we need to draw a spell on our next draw step. Well, I guess we only go to 1 on the attack, so technically not dead. Yes, now we are dead. Benelish Marshal. Did not think we were going to lose that one, but just kind of flooded out. And our opponent had really good answers for our threats with those Conclave Tribunals. So I think we want additional card advantage because we just kind of ran out of gas. And then Lyra seems like a pretty high impact spell. The sweepers also seem pretty good. The spot removal, on the other hand, wasn't that impressive. I mean, it was fine. But I don't know that we just want to be trading away our cards just to get rid of, like, a 2-1 type deal. Do need to cut a couple of cards from this. I think we can shave at least 1 Ionize. We still want some spot removal. This seems alright to me. Still going with 2 Ixalan's Bindings. It's a weird number. They're not great, but they can answer our opponent's Conclave Tribunals, which is their main removal spell. This hand is questionable because it's only 2 lands. We have the sweeper, which is nice, but we could just get mana screwed. I think we mulligan that. Yeah, this is a little bit better. Chemist's Insight we want to keep on top as a way to get that card back that we lost from mulliganing. No 1-drop is interesting considering we saw multiple 1-mana creatures in the last game. We can wonder if our opponent boarded some of them out. Maybe went on a slightly bigger plan. Yeah, Danto Vanguard is a solid threat. One of the reasons why the Ixalan's bindings are still important to have access to. Legion's Landing. Okay, so that's a 1-mana threat. Now that's it though. Our opponent didn't have another creature to play. Now we have a couple of options at our disposal. We can hold up Ionize, or just Ixalan's Binding the Vanguard. I think we just Ixalan's Binding. Adanto's Vanguard. Adanto Vanguard, just a pretty annoying threat in this situation. If we're able to effectively get rid of it, it can go a long way. We're just hoping to have enough time to use the Chemist's Insight. Oh, there's a Johnny. Okay. Well, promptly punished for using the Ixalan's Binding. Not a card we saw in the last game, but it's definitely an annoying threat. Although we drew Teferi, I like just passing here. Battleish Marshal, huh? Yeah. I think we just Ionize. Just can't really afford to have that card sitting in play at the moment. And if we draw land, we can Teferi minus. Instead, it's a Deafening Clarion, which isn't the best in the spot, but I think we just use it to get rid of the vampire. Johnny's Emblem. Yeah, that is something we have to hope just doesn't happen. So need a land to answer the Ajani. And found one, so that's step 1. We can play Teferi minus. Still have to be a little bit worried. Our opponent has 4 cards in hand. Possible that they just have another Johnny queued up. Or another History of Benalia, rather. Well, the good thing about this is we have the Fiery Cannonade, so we can answer some of the knights that our opponent has brought to the battlefield. And I think that's exactly what we're supposed to do. Although, yeah, we just do it now. Because we don't want to let the History of Benalia trigger happen. So our opponent gets one more knight out of these histories. And then still has that Ajani that's going to come back. They still have that Ajani that's going to come back. What is this going to be? A Venerated Luxodon, perhaps? Wow. Okay. This is a pretty absurd draw. Our opponent's deck looks pretty impressive here, not gonna lie. So we have this Seal Away, but that's not really cutting it against these knights with Vigilance. And then with this Ajani coming off the top of our opponent's library, which we know about, I think we're probably gonna lose this game and the match. The Legion's Landing can flip as well. Yeah. I guess we'll get rid of the Hunted Witness because, well, why not, I guess. But taking 4 damage doesn't feel good. And there's a Johnny. So we need to find another sweeper. We have that Chemister's Insight in the graveyard, which we can go to. We did find a sweeper. That being said, we still have the Ajani, and the fact that this Adanto, the first, is in play is really bad for us. The first fort is really bad for us. So if we draw something like an explosion for our draw step, that could draw us a bunch. Like, we need a big haymaker, something that can draw us a lot of cards, and it's just a land. So that's going to be the match. So yes, we will elect to go first, and with a pretty good hand overall. We have this Search for Azcanta, which is really what we're looking for. And then some removal to go alongside of it. And if our opponent is playing a control deck, then Search for Azcanta is one of those cards that can just be a big game changer. Could be a mono blue. We see 2 islands, a little bit mismatched there, but two islands on our opponent's side of the battlefield. I don't think we want another explosion. We've already got one. And we also want to be filling up our graveyard. So let's go ahead and bin that one. Filling up the graveyard in order to flip the Search for Azcanta. Okay, so I'm going to let that resolve. We can Justice Strike it if we want to. And I think against this mono blue deck, you want to just get get creatures off the battlefield pretty aggressively. If our opponent taps out, we can Ixalan's Binding away the Djinn, which seems pretty good. Into Sacred Foundry, then drew a Sacred Foundry. That's kind of how it goes, huh? So this is good because it stops future Tempest Djinns, and our opponent could definitely have additional copies of Tempest Djinn in hand, for sure. Nightfell Sprite, that's kind of annoying. I think we want to leave up Counter Magic. I mean, Surveil is good, but it's not actual card advantage. It's card filtering. And yeah, let's just go for the Syncopate on this one. Maybe our opponent has like a Spell Pierce or something, but we just go for it. That's good. Lightning Strike. I mean, I think we just keep it. I'm going to pass and then go for the strike on the Nightfell Sprite, and if our opponent reacts, we can Ionize, but no reaction. Let's see if our opponent probably doesn't have a counter for that. Nope. So we can just flip the search. We have 7 cards in the graveyard. And at a very healthy life total, we'd probably just have this almost wrapped up. So I think we want to just take this opportunity now while our opponent's tapped out to draw some cards and get rid of this. This Merfolk Trickster just seems really strong. Just continuing our plan of get the creatures off the battlefield. Now, Curious Obsession is still a card that could be good in this spot, but yeah, our opponent just saw the writing on the wall. So, playing against mono blue, we want to just be killing those creatures aggressively. So, in many ways, the removal is better than the counter magic. Sometimes the counter magic can be a little bit tricky to set up. Lyra is a card that is really strong if you can get it down. Ixalan's Binding is one of the trickier removal spells, for sure. Deafening Clarion, yeah, it's pretty good. We didn't end up drawing it that game, but it's a pretty good card in the matchup. I think we can shave on Teferi. Teferi, sometimes you cast it, and for 5 mana in this matchup, it's not exactly what you want. Ionize was actually pretty decent that particular game, but as a 3 mana counterspell on the draw, I think we cut those. We want to instead just have almost max removal and then Essence Scatter is still strong, but we have our card advantage. The Chemister's Insight, even if it gets countered, we can still jumpstart it, which is huge. Unfortunately, well, our opponent mulliganed, but we for sure also have to mulligan that. But our 6-card hand is pretty good. Seal Away. I think we just bottom that because we already have 2 removal spells, and we definitely want to hit our 4th land drop. So if our opponent does have a Curious Obsession here, we would be on the plan of just getting rid of the Mistcloaked Herald with the Justice Strike, but we don't immediately see that Curious Obsession. Card of Course is good, though. It helps our opponent kind of fight through having mulliganed already. I think we pass even with multiple removal spells. We can potentially get a 2-for-1 off the Deafening Clarion. The card we don't want to see is Tempest Djinn as far as threats, but I think we can afford to take 1 for a couple turns. Now, if our opponent just passes the turn, there's a decent chance we just want to go for this Lightning Strike, and I think we do, just to be mana efficient. It could provoke a reaction. I doubt it. I doubt our opponent saves it. No. So yeah, we've got plenty of this 3 damage removal in our hand. Unfortunately, the problem with the Deafening Clarion is it is a sorcery. But if we're just taking 2, we can take that and then save our Justice Strike. And just try to deal with these creatures the hard way. Now our opponent might have a counter, but no. Maybe another Merfolk Trickster. No. So looks like our opponent's flooded. But there's a Tempest Djinn. So our opponent has Tempest Djinn plus counter magic. That would be pretty strong. We have a few different ways we can try to deal with the Tempest Djinn. I'm gonna go for the Ixalan's Binding here. It might not work out. Our opponent hopefully doesn't have a conditional counter like Syncopate, but if they have Negate or something like that. Oh, it's just Disdainful Stroke, okay. So yeah, that was kind of the issue with doing that, but we still have the cheaper removal spell in Justice Strike. So as long as our opponent doesn't have another counter here, I think we'll be fine. Now if they do have another counter, we may just lose. So maybe we were just too greedy going for that Ixalan's Binding. I think this time we do the Justice Strike, and just because it is less likely to get countered. And before our opponent draws. There's a Dive Down. So that is another card that we risked running into. Our opponent could have had it last turn. We don't really know if they did or not. So now we're forced to go down to 2. Oh, wow. Siren Storm Tamer. And that is really strong. Because our opponent can counter this ability from the Ixalan's Binding. But it looks like also a Syncopate. So our opponent just kind of had everything. So we go to game 3. Kind of regret that one turn going for the Binding rather than the Justice Strike. Who knows if our opponent had the dive down right there also, but I don't think we really are trying to change up our game plan too much. The bindings, as we saw, can be awkward. We didn't board in the additional 2. Yeah, for sure we can't mulligan this one. So we're hoping to keep our opponent off Curious Obsession this game. That's how they really, how the mono blue deck starts to really chain some cards together. And once they can get a creature with Curious Obsession and back it up with some sort of protection or counter magic, it's just really tough to win from the other side. Field of Ruin not at its best in the matchup, but hey, it's still a land, right? So I like just letting that resolve. Our opponent has the Obsession, but we have double removal spell, so even if our opponent has a counter here, we can Justice Strike on the way back. Okay, dive down. So this lets our opponent get in. But now we can go for the Justice Strike. It would be pretty insane if our opponent just had double dive down there, but it's not to be. And with Lyra, that's good if our opponent taps out for some reason, like plays like a Tempest Djinn, we can just go slam Lyra. If our opponent passes, though, we just have to be very worried about counter spells. So I think we just pass. With this Chemister's Insight, it gives us something to do, which is important. And it looks like no Obsession, so if we're just taking 2, that's okay. Now, our opponent could have a Syncopate as well, which is a really good way to answer Jumpstart cards. We'll see if that's one of the... Nope. Just going to let that resolve. I think we still want to respect the possibility our opponent has a counter, though. So I'm going to play out Search for Azcanta. I'm a bit surprised that our opponent hasn't done a lot here. Probably quite flooded. There is a Tempest Djinn. Which is somewhat annoying. Definitely don't want another Search for Azcanta. So we've got some decisions to make. But I think it's pretty clear that we just pass the turn here with this Settle the Wreckage. And then we also have this Expansion Explosion, which we can potentially copy. Siren Storm Tamer, though, that's a pretty insane draw for our opponent. Because that's a card that can answer Settle the Wreckage. But I'm going to go for copying the Settle. And we'll see if our opponent has a counter for this. And they do have a Wizard's Retort. So that means we're taking a big hit, which is pretty scary. Going all the way down to 5. We're going to be able to land a Lyra, but okay, I think we keep this Merfolk Trickster. We keep this Essence Scatter in case our opponent has a Merfolk Trickster. We can counter that. And Lyra could potentially just stabilize the board for us. That's our plan, anyways. Okay, if our opponent just passes, that's good. Oh, wow. That doesn't really make any sense to me at all. Now it does. Now it all makes sense. There's a dive down. Okay. Bye-bye, Lyra. Had to block there. We can counter this Tempest Djinn, which we pretty much are obligated to do. Okay, well, it's not the worst spot, even though we don't have any answers. We need to find some off the search. There's Teferi. So I think we keep that and transform. Scanta. You can go for an activation. Found a lot of pretty good stuff here. Seal Away is a way to get rid of the Tempest Djinn, so I think we take that. And there's a Deafening Clarion, which can answer these other creatures. So it looks like things are kind of starting to turn around. And we can go ahead and seal away the Tempest Djinn right now before our opponent gets to untap. And this is kind of where we've stabilized, almost. We've almost got to the point where our opponent is not going to be able to come back. Although it looks like they kept that card on top of their deck. Well, let's try to sweep this board. And that worked. Get an expansion explosion. That's one of the ways to actually close out the game and become a win condition. Yeah, not going to fight over that Merfolk Trickster. we can just go ahead and cast the explosion part. So that would deal 2 to this Trickster in response. And that's probably... Yep, that is going to be the game. Sweet, it looks like we're going to get to go first. And I think pretty much every turn 2 search for a Scanta. And you're just keeping. So even though this hand is pretty bad besides that, we are hoping that the search can kind of fix some of these problems that we have with this hand. Primarily the mana. We need some lands. Clearly need some lands, but this gives us 2 looks towards those lands. Interesting. Okay, blue-red. Island and mountain for our opponent. Okay, well, so far, not what we wanted. So, yep, I mean, we had a few cards to go through to find our third land, but hey, sometimes you don't get there. Hopefully this time at least we find it, but nope. Just pretty unlucky. Don't know exactly what our opponent's up to, other than being a blue-red deck. Wow, this is pretty absurd here. Still no land? Oh my gosh. Wow. Pretty unbelievable. I'm just gonna negate this Chemister's Insight. That way we don't have to discard to hand size at least, right? Alright, we definitely have to keep any land. And our opponent hasn't done much, but they're just so ahead on... They're very much ahead, having hit their land drops and now having this card advantage. And a lot of our cards are probably pretty bad in this matchup. It looks like our opponent's playing some sort of blue-red control-ish combo-y sort of deck. Enigma Drake, huh? Well, we don't have... Our 3 damage burn spells can't answer an Enigma Drake. We can try to Ixalan's Binding it. I guess we'd go for that. Certainly could get countered, and it does get countered. But the fact that our opponent has a threat out means that we just have to try to answer it. And if our opponent has a wall of counter magic, then our options are very limited. One option is just jamming Teferi here, honestly. I think I'm going to go for the binding, though. To be fair, even though we are mana screwed, this seems like the type of matchup that is just quite bad game one, regardless. We've got a number of cards that aren't very effective. And it may not be that good after board, looking at our opponent's list. I think we want to keep this plains. Well, I'm going to go for Teferi. It very well may not work out. And there it is. The counterspell. Okay. Well, let's look at what we got as far as options to combat what our opponent's doing. For sure, we want negates. Disdainful Strokes don't actually seem that good based on we didn't see a lot of big spells from our opponent. Seal Away seems like an upgrade to some of our other removal. Chemister's Insight. We may want the Lyras as high impact cards. For sure, we want Nezahal. Lightning Strike and Deafening Clarion are the easiest cuts for sure. Ixalan's Binding, I think, is pretty reasonable. Yeah, Settle the Wreckage is definitely worse than Ixalan's Binding. Okay. I mean, if our opponents, we don't know what win conditions are in our opponent's deck. We other than Enigma Drake, we could suspect there could be Nimizits as well. This hand has lands, so it's got that going for it. Unfortunately, no Search for Scanna. Search for Scanna would just be amazing if we had it this turn. Be the perfect card to play. That being said, we're still fine. We're just gonna we're forced to play this draw go game with our opponent. We'd like to draw some form of card advantage. We have a number of card advantage spells in our deck to draw into. But that is something you have to worry about playing these types of control decks, is sometimes you draw the wrong half of your deck. Like if your deck is a bunch of removal and counter spells and card draw, sometimes you just draw removal or you just draw card draw. Now this Lightning Strike seems fairly irrelevant. It looks like our opponent is missing a land drop, so this could be our game to win. And now we drew a card advantage spell in Chemister's Insight, one of our best possible draws. The one card we want to be a little bit worried about is Syncopate. So I think we just don't even cast the Chemister's Insight yet, because we don't want to get it syncopated. We didn't see Syncopate, of course, from our opponent, but okay, our opponent's actually going for an Anticipate. We could just counter this, yeah. I like that. Just aggressively making sure our opponent doesn't hit their land drops. And then we can just jam Teferi. And Teferi seems like a card that once it gets into play, I mean, this could just be lights out. And now with another Chemist's Insight, we're pretty set. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and just draw 2 cards right now, while our opponent's all tapped out. Okay, well, we didn't have the negate in hand. What we do have is our Ixalan's Binding. So we can Ixalan's Binding the Sorcerer's Spyglass and have negate up for a potential counterspell of our opponents. So this puts us in a pretty reasonable spot, pretty good spot. Yeah, I like just negating back. And our opponent's seen enough. So, kind of lopsided games there. But you will get those when you're playing basically a control mirror and one player just starts missing land drops. I mean, that's how Magic goes sometimes. Now, in terms of changing things around, don't know that we want to make any major adjustments. In fact, I don't think we do anything differently. I mean, normally I would want Disdainful Strokes, but we haven't seen any cards with converted mana cost 4 or more. I mean, certainly there's probably some in our opponent's deck, but the fact that we haven't seen them makes it seem a little bit on the looser side to bring that card in. Lyra. Okay, so that is, I believe we only have 1 copy of Lyra in our deck. But it's a way to just, if we get it in play, it's one of those high impact cards like Teferi. Like, once it's on the battlefield, things start to heat up. I'm going to play the Sulfur Falls so that we do have the Essence Scatter in case our opponent plays Enigma Drake, which is one of well, it's the only real win condition we've seen so far out of our opponent. And one thing we can say about this deck that we're seeing on the other side of the table is that it's got a lot of card filtering. We didn't see Opt in the other game, but we saw a lot of Anticipates. We've seen Chemist's Insight. But it looks like our opponent is missing a land drop, so we know how that can get. But we don't really have a good way to punish that. And if our opponent just has a card draw spell, oh, there's a land, so that's pretty good. We can try to start running out threats here. I think we do that, actually. We've got some counters of our own, but our opponent probably has a Chemist's Insight to start drawing cards. And so I'm just going to play out that Lyra. But our opponent did have the Sinister Sabotage, unfortunately. Ooh. Our opponent is... That's a little bit risky. But maybe our opponent just didn't have a counter. Because now we can land our Teferi. And I think we just put that... We tuck away that Enigma Drake. So now with the opt, I think our opponent could actually find the Enigma Drake again. If that's what they're going for. But it looks like no, that's not what our opponent's up to. So we can draw a card and start to really take over the game. I'm going to cast a Chemister's Insights because we have Ionize up. Looks like that's going to resolve. Suspect our opponent has a Chemister's Insight as well. I think we just counter it though. Like, we're just trying to cut our opponent off of resources. And we have the Essence Scatter for that guy. So now we've just kind of set it up that we're running our opponent out of cards. Like, we can, which is exactly where you want to be in the control matchup. I mean, we are flooding a little bit. But I think it should be fine. Now we're stopping future Enigma Drakes as well with that Ixalan's Binding. And we have a Chemister's Insight. Those are easy to forget about. I actually almost forgot that we had that in the graveyard, but we do, and we can jumpstart. And we just get to sit back behind our Teferi. Blink of an eye on the Ixalan's Binding, huh? Well, we can either counter that, or we could Justice Strike. I think we just go for the Syncopate, though. Like, if we let that resolve, we would have to Justice Strike the Drake. And, okay, yep. Looks like we are on the play. And pretty interesting mana base, but we do keep. We would love to have a Steam Vents or a Sacred Foundry here to kind of make these lands come into play untapped. Watery Grave, though, on the other side of the table. That's interesting. Could be like an Esper control deck, blue-black. Thought Erasure. That's pretty good. That is a strong card for our opponent to have. And they're just going to go for the Teferi, which makes sense. That makes sense. Oh, looks like it is Grixis. As we see that Steam Vents go into our opponent's graveyard there. We're kind of just forced to sit here and we actually just drew the Syncopate for this Disinformation campaign, which is really lucky. Because that card could just destroy us. I mean, we don't know exactly what is in this blue-black deck of our opponents, but we saw one Surveil card already. And we're just hoping that our opponent plays some random creature that we can interact with, but instead it's not to be. It's a Chemist's Insight, which is, that card is just a really important card in these sorts of matchups, and we haven't drawn one of ours. Our opponent has drawn one of theirs. And another disinformation campaign. Yeah, that's gonna wreck us. That disinformation campaign. Yep, that's gonna be a real problem. To be fair, we haven't really drawn that well either, but our opponent's deck is it's firing, and ours is really not. Well, it's an easy choice to Essence Scatter the Nicol Bolas. Don't have to think about that one much. I think we just put our lands into play. Our opponent has a lot of discard. Between Disinformation Campaign, Thought Erasure, and then Nicol Bolas, like, that stuff will pick your hand apart. And look at our hand here. It's just doesn't have anything. And now the campaign goes back to our opponent's hand. And Doom Whisper. Yep. That seems good. I'm just going to concede this. So we want negates. We want Seal Away. I don't think we want these sweepers. For sure, the other Chemist's Insight. Ixalan's Binding seems pretty good as a way to deal with cards like the Disinformation Campaign that we saw. Definitely don't want Lightning Strikes. And I think we want Disdainful Strokes. We saw Nicol Bolas and Doom Whisperer. So those seem pretty good. Yeah, settle seems kind of awkward, actually. So we're burning out a lot of our removal. But I think we kind of have to make a major shift in our approach to this matchup after that game 1 beating that we took. And none of these cards really stand out in a big way. Lyra, very hit or miss in this. Like, we don't know exactly what's going on with our opponent's deck, but we saw Doom Whisperer, and Lyra can get blocked by Doom Whisperer, so that is also an issue. This time around, we do have a search for turn 2. So I think we keep just based on that fact alone. And we have negates. We have some counter magic. Oh wow, is this really a duress? Oh my god, our opponent has all discard. Their deck just is only discard spells. and insane creatures. Wow. So yeah, I wasn't ready for it, but there it is. Duress takes away our search for Azcanta. So our opponent knows about all of our spells in hand. Thief of Sanity, yep. That resolves. Cool. I mean, that card is very strong. And can take over this game for our opponent. We boarded out some of our removal that could have killed it, but we do have cards like Ixalan's Binding that would have been good. Essence Scatter. So the thief hits us, gets that trigger. Now we have a Chemister's Insight in our graveyard. That's interesting. We can cast that. So do we want to negate this duress? I guess I'll just let it resolve. See what our opponent takes. Teferi, not really much of a surprise. And this went from bad to worse with that other Thief of Sanity. So I think we just Chemister's Insight. And I'll pitch this negate. So we found another Teferi. So we might as well cast that. Cast that and minus on a thief. Now our opponent can attack down the Teferi. Can kill it. But that means that they don't hit us with that thief. But it looks like another big spell. Oh! It's the Eldest Reborn coming down. That's pretty insane. So our opponent has multiples of our cards. We can use this explosion to get rid of the thief, which we pretty much have to. Pretty much obligated to do that. But yeah, the Eldest Reborn is pretty backbreaking. What's this? This is in response to the Eldest Reborn trigger. Our opponent's thinking about casting something? I'll just pitch this land, I think. Oh, yep, that's good. Our counters just haven't lined up against our opponent's draw. We did draw an Ixalan's Binding. Not clear that it's any good here. I'm just gonna Chemister's Insight. Nope, that didn't work. I was hoping to draw land to Ionize, but things are just kind of going from bad to worse. I mean, we have to worry about the Eldest Reborn getting something back, and then the Nicol Bolas flipping is also worrisome. And these counter spells just have looked miserable. So our opponent is going to get back to Teferi, which we can Ixalan's Binding one of these. So our opponent just going to go for the big flip here. Transformation, I should say. Yep. There. That's good. That happens. Got to give our opponent some props for what they've been able to do here. We can Binding something. But I really don't think there's any way we can win here. We can counter this back. Sure. We kind of have to Binding the Teferi because Teferi can minus on the Ixalan's Binding itself, but now we're still dealing with Nicol Bolas and Thief of Sanity. And Thief of Sanity is one of those cards that once it hits you, if it actually hits you, then it's really tough. It's really tough to come back from. And we're seeing it here. We got hit by it, and then our opponent was able to start resolving other haymakers. Yep. Yep. Everything just kind of happened in the wrong order. So that is going to be this match.